All right, welcome back. Today we are starting our first video of the year in the Roughly Speaking series. Roughly Speaking is, if you're a follower of Jordan Peterson, it's just a thing he says all the time. He'll say something and then he'll qualify it. He'll say, yeah, it's this way, roughly speaking, and he kind of dodges all these bullets later. But this series is about Jordan Peterson because everyone knows I'm a big fan. If you want to join the discussion, join Latter-day Lobsters on Facebook, and we're always talking about gospel-related things and, of course, talking about Jordan Peterson, who's been, I'd say, very influential even among LDS people. But today we're starting our book club. We're reading 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. And we're going to be covering about a chapter, an episode. And so hopefully we can get through it by, in the next 6 months or in the next year, over across the year. But we have a great panel. I'm your host, Rough Stone Trolling. We're joined today by Lara Sturm, excuse me. Laura, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll have each panelist introduce themselves.
Hey, yeah, Laura Sturm. I live in Virginia currently, lifelong member of the church. And what else? I have 5 kids. About three-fifths of them are grown. Anyway, whatever. Some grown, some not. And I'm an artist and a writer, and that's pretty much me right now.
Awesome. And then Chris, go ahead. Chris is he deserves an introduction, right? Chris is the AI folklorist, and so you've been blowing up in the past year. And so go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Who knows if I actually keep that name, but I've been figuring out how to brand myself properly. So I'm a professor at BYU. I teach folklore and myth and Latter-day Saint literature. I'm married to an incredible woman, Christine, who co-hosts Angels and Seer Stones with me. We have 3 boys. Our oldest is 13, and I joined the church when I was his age, when I was 13. And so I I love being part of lobsters. I like bold Latter-day Saintness, and I really like Jordan Peterson. So the two coming together is a dream.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. I think it's actually brave that you're here for many reasons. So thank you. Devin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Find my toddler in the background. Um, I'm Devin McDonald. Laura is actually my oldest sister, and she's the one who brought me to this group, her and my other brother. Um, and I have 3 kids. I live in Santa Quinn, Utah. Um, I'm a stay at home dad, and I work with the National Guard on occasion part time. So, yeah.
Awesome. Javier, go ahead.
Well, my name is Javier Vargas. I'm originally from Mexico, but I live here in the States now. I've been living in Utah for the last 13 years or so. And you guys are way cooler than me, so I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, you guys have way cooler credentials.
No, man, we're glad you're here, man. I'm glad we're getting your perspective. And then of course I'm Alejandro, and technically on my ID at BYU it says faculty on it. So I feel like like I'm rolling, but I'm just a postbac researcher. But I do psychology, and I studied psych and philosophy. And then I love Jordan Peterson. He kind of got me into all this, and so I've read so much since I've come across him. So we're gonna dive into 12 Rules for Life, Chapter 1. The first rule. So this book, first of all, is his first like kind of like popular book for a popular audience. And the background of the book was that he made a post on Quora. People said something like, what are the essential things you should know about life?" And he wrote up this thing. He came up with about, I think, 32-ish rules, and people loved it. It was like one of the top posts in Quora. And so Penguin reached out to him and said, "Hey, maybe you should write a book about this." And he said, "Sure, let me write up a few chapters, see if you like it." They loved it, and then at the same time, he kind of blew up with this whole with his YouTube channel and with like the political stuff going on in Canada. But this book, I would say it's for a general audience. kind of a more popular audience, but it does touch on kind of some of these philosophical, political, psychological themes that he is famous for. And even, the Latter-day Lobsters, the name is a reference to this chapter. And so I think it's a perfect chapter to start with for the year. Um, but I think let's just start with talking about kind of like what we enjoyed about the chapter, and then I'll talk about kind of like some of, I think, kind of what his argument in the chapter is, and kind of like get a little deeper. So, anyone want to start with like some things that they like just really loved about the chapter, or any thoughts they had about it?
I think there's some great insights in this chapter. It's kind of a hard chapter, um, based on what it implies. But the idea that success breeds success, and failure, or the perception of failure, leads to bullying, leads to people thinking you're weak, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's an insight that we're going to get to more compassionate readings in other chapters, but yeah, this is a insight it's true, right? It's like straightforward. Just this is how this fallen world operates: competition and aggression and passive aggression.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I think actually it's a pretty controversial chapter, for a lot of reasons. Um, when I was reading it, so I read Maps of Meaning forever ago, and I liked it. And he's more like explicit about his philosophical kind of ideas, but in this book it's a bit more implicit because he's trying to reach a general audience. But he makes a really interesting case about like what it means to be a human being, and he basically says, being human means being embedded within a hierarchy, and that has its pros and cons. If you're if you're in the top stratosphere of a hierarchy, you get all the resources and you get all the privileges, and if you're at the bottom, you get sick and you die, and that's scary. And I think people are, I don't know if rightly upset, but they have reason to be upset about this. Um, what do you guys think?
I was thinking about it a lot as I was listening. I read it years ago, but now I have young adult children, and I was thinking of it in the context of like, how do I, because I hate this. I hate that it's true. I hate that this is the world we live in. I hate that, like, that the reality is you are going to be judged based on the way you look, the way you sound, like all of those things, and it makes me kind of bummed out. But also, like, I have to teach them this thing, and you do that as a parent all the time. Hey, make sure you brush your teeth. People don't want to be friends with somebody who has stinky breath or whatever, right? But but trying to find that balance between, like, also teaching them how to make a more ideal world, in the way you should not necessarily judge people based on these things, but you are going to be judged on these things. So that's what I was thinking about a lot as I was listening, is like, how do we kind of strike that balance between eschewing this as kind of our core value system, but also recognizing this is what we exist in.
I love that. Yeah, and I think about that too now that I have kids. Because when I first started like listening to Jordan, I didn't have kids. Now I do, and I'm like, oh yeah, like I have to socialize my child, and that means a lot of different things. Not just getting them to say please and thank you, but like getting them to play well with kids, and being polite towards adults. And like one of the things that is interesting is when I was growing up, my parents would come up to my parents and say, your kids are so affectionate, how'd you do that? And he said, well, I just love them and I hug them. And we do the same thing. But then it's like, oh, my toddler is hugging kids that maybe don't want to be hugged, or she's hugging them too aggressively, and we could be like, hey, chill out. You gotta be soft around others and dogs, and if you hug them, you gotta make sure they're okay with it. Don't hug them too much. But that the socialization like is going to set them up, to be successful in life. And then growing up in the U.S., I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was born in 1992, in late 1992, and so the summer of 1992 was like the riots, like the L.A. I can't remember who they were writing about, but it was a kind of like a Black Lives Matter type thing. Someone was arrested or killed. I think it was Rodney King. I'm not sure, but
Rodney King. Yeah.
yeah, so I can't imagine the worry my mom was in. Seeing LA on fire, like 8, 9 months pregnant and then having us is crazy. But yeah, I mean, my dad and my parents taught us, hey, there's a famous line from Stand and Deliver about the math teacher. I love that movie, right? And he's like, they're gonna judge you by your name, by your complexion, and then by your behavior. And you're dark skinned and you have a Spanish last name, so you're already 2 strikes out. So shape up, because it's you're under a lot of different pressure. And so that movie in particular struck me. I was like, whoa. And then this reading this movie, or sorry, reading this book made me think a lot about that. And we'll get into that in a bit. But any other thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I have a comment. So, I think even though this is like Jordan Peterson's first and probably foremost accessible book to the general audience, it's still like very Christian. Even though I don't think it sets how to be, it's like ridiculously Christian. So I know that is also a turnoff to a lot of people. But thankfully for us, Latter-day Saints, it's actually an aid, I would say, because this whole idea of standing up with your shoulders back surprisingly has little to do with actual lobsters. But to me, it reminds me of temple liturgy, right? So if you stand up straight, shoulders back, then your chest is exposed. And the idea of temple initiatory, one of the ideas, right, is that the chest is the receptacle of pure and virtuous principles. So even though there is this underlying theme of like, you have to present yourself as though you have power in the world and act powerful, let's say, I think really what it's saying is being carries weight, or being is a burden, and therefore you must face the burden head on, which to me sounds like also your chest is the receptacle of pure and virtuous principles, therefore don't shy away from being. And I know that's not like what he says clearly, like it's not clearly spelled out, but in my mind that connection is made, right? So not to say that this book is inaccessible to Christians per se, but I think it's a huge turnoff if you don't already come with that mindset, because a lot of Peterson's arguments and everything are based on the presupposition that Christianity is valuable.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's kind of interesting because I know Lara and you guys were kind of talking about it. This first chapter as being more negative, more like how the world sees us and how we should interact with the world. But I saw it more of like how I interact with the world, um, and how I don't know. I just saw it more of like a positive, like trying to be more positive mentality towards like the negativity, having your standing up straight with your shoulders back and kind of just being braver or more courageous with kind of the crappiness that's out there. That's more of how I took it when I read this first chapter.
I think that's so cool. I think you're right. When we come to life, like when we're born, Joseph says we get these bodies and they're designed to withstand all those who would want to oppress us, right? There's these forces in the universe that want to oppress us. And so, yeah, it's a positive message. It's like, how do you navigate? There's a reality that we're in a fallen world, but how do we navigate that world? I thought about the temple initiatory too. I thought about this idea of being a king and a priest. And, this, I mean, top lobster, king and priest, same thing, right? The idea that God wants me actually to be confident in politics and religion, like everything. I need to be independent. I need to be able to be a man or a woman. And that's that means being able to resist these systems that are in place, um, and and his word dangerous, right? Love it.
Yeah, I love all these comments, and so if we want to get kind of more philosophical, I think what Peterson is doing, and this is really he's really setting the stage for the rest of the book. But he's saying the technical term is ontology. He's saying what are human beings like? What's the nature of being human? What's the nature of being a human being? And he's saying, yeah, like our ontology is that we're embedded within a nexus, a network of social value. And he says he puts it more concretely. We're in a hierarchy, and that has big implications because I feel like in America, we think about ourselves like and our identity as being like rugged individuals, doing rugged individual American things, and that's sort of true to a degree. But at the end of the day, we're really connected, and we're interconnected in very complex ways. And he's saying, yeah, that's human being. It's not just the scripture that comes to mind is I think it's DNC, where he says, um, there are things that act and there are things that are acted upon, and that's not. And I think people they misinterpret that scripture, thinking that that's a metaphysical claim that like the reality is made up of I don't know something that acts and things that acts, but to me that's an ontological claim. He's saying the nature of the entities and the beings that exist are things that act and things that are acted upon, and so Peterson I think echoes that. He's saying, yeah, you're agents that you act, and not only do you act, you exist and live within a hierarchy, and so you have to navigate that, and if you don't take your place, then you're gonna be stomped on. It's really sad. And I think what Chris, to what you're saying, it's like, yeah, we live in this fallen world. We live in history where all the history and all of the bad deeds in the past they burden us and they're on our shoulders. But we can still act within that. So it's like one of those tough dad lessons. Yeah, but I think in the end it's something that's very hopeful. Devin, glad you made it, man. Can you introduce yourself, and if you want to add any thoughts, feel free to do so.
Yeah. My name's Devin. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, perfect. My name's Devin. I've been in the lobster group since, I don't know, a long time, 2016, 2017. I've, I don't know, back when Jordan Peterson was doing his tours, um, I was able to go see him, not at the first tour, but anyway, I met him back then, right after 12 Rules came out, and yeah, I don't know what else, how everyone else has introduced themselves. So
No, that's perfect. Thank you, man. Yeah, glad you're here. Um, all right. So, um, yeah. So Peterson then he sort of introduces the idea of hierarchy. He talks about the birds and the wrens and how they go to great lengths to kind of protect their territory. And then he talks about lobsters. And this is really cool. I think this is one of the coolest things. This is based off of an experiment he did with his colleagues, where they figured out that lobsters kind of share a similar neurological system as humans, and it's serotonin based. And so lobsters will, on the ocean floor, will also try to claim territory since there's scarcity, right? There's scarce resources. And when they fight and they win, they have serotonin boosts, and they flex, and they're awesome, and they get all the lady lobsters, the mates. um, but then when they lose, it like screws up their neurology, and they become depressed, and they hunch over. And so I think in his videos he'd say, if you give a lobster Prozac, it'll puff up again and it'll be ready to fight again, which is incredible. That's insane to me, actually. But similarly, human beings, where if we feel defeated, it's like yeah, you're if people are, I mean, it's this is true of like the clinical field, but like a lot of people who are in mental health hospitals and who are suffering and stuff, oftentimes they'll see a therapist, and for the first time, like they're being listened to, and it's kind of sad, and they don't have the social support, and they don't have family, and all sorts of it's not just a mental health issue, it's just like their circumstances are tragic, and that influences your mental health. And on the other hand, and I've seen this, people fix their relationships with their families, and or they construct them a healthier social life and a healthier family life, and then their depression symptoms get way down. They're reduced, and some of them even get off their medication, and they're fine. And it's amazing. It's incredible. But yeah, he uses the lobster as the example of this both hierarchy that's sort of an abstract thing, but also like it's grounded in biology and neurology. So I think he makes a very powerful. He gives us a very powerful example of what he's talking about here.
Okay, I had something I just was thinking about. Have any of you guys ever read the children's book You Are Special? And it's like the little wooden people. No, maybe not. Okay. He's like Christian author Max Lucado, and he talks about how people get dots and stars. They get dots for doing bad things and stars stickers on them. Anyway, and then the more stars you get, the more sometimes people are like, "Oh, you have so many stars. Here's another star." Anyway, so again, there's like a very simplified like child version of the way it is, and I was and again, I really wrestle with this because I don't want this to be the reality that we live in, but it is the reality that we live in. But I was thinking, so my husband is a good example of a top lobster eat, but somebody who had a lot of success as a young person. Got a scholarship to BYU for wrestling or whatever, and then had success on his mission. And it just like this kind of perpetual success that then meant that he had a fairly successful career. He was in the military for 20 years, did very well, now has a great job, whatever, all of these things. And he just kind of has perpetually had this whatever. But I guess something him and I talk about a lot is some people are just kind of set up to have that, and naturally, right, like they're whatever, the cards are stacked for them or against them. But I think what's tricky is you get to this space of kind of like maybe having a lot of that success and then thinking that you maybe deserve it more than other people. And so again, that's what I wrestle with, is that idea of kind of like, this is the reality we live in. It's so easy to kind of go to maybe put a gospel spin on it, and then we have gospel prosperity gospel, right? Like, I deserve this because, or I was born with these better traits because I was more righteous in the whatever, like all these kind of ways we have of framing it, rather than we all just kind of are supposed to do the best we can with what we have. But then we also assign like a morality to it. And the reality is, I don't think being successful in business, that there's any moral value to that. It's just going to make your life easier, right? And so anyway, this is kind of what I think through all the time, is that there's these two, and he even talks about it in the how there's these two, how we have yin and yang, and how they are kind of, and he wasn't talking about it in that context, but that's what I was thinking. This is our mortal existence. This is I was even thinking I would probably call it the natural man. This is the natural man. This is what our natural man existence is, and we have to exist in this sphere. But how do we elevate the way that we think about it?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, how there are people who are given a whole lot, and then people who are lacking. And I find myself in both camps every now and then, and that people who are given a lot do have, within, I think, the gospel lens, they do have a responsibility to be the best that the gospel has to offer, to lift up those people, to be those saviors upon Mount Zion, and leading others to Christ, even if it's for a moment, and not, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. There's still that responsibility that once you've chosen to take this path, anyone that you can lift up, you lift up.
Yeah, that's good. I think this is so, it's kind of tough, right? Because it's almost, when we talk about it, we almost place a moral value on it, right? Would I want to admit that I have failings that lead to more failings, that have led people to bully me and see weakness in me? Oh crap, I don't want to admit something like that, right? But it's true. Like, I've experienced moments in my life. I think back to being a pledge in a fraternity and taking more crap than other guys took, right? There's kind of a perceived weakness in me because I'm an LDS kid, and I still have, even though I'm drinking beer, I still have some of the sort of not evolutionarily evolved to succeed in this setting, right? Um, and I grew up in a military family, and so yeah, you can see the hierarchy and it's sort of exaggerated all around me. I think as Latter-day Saints, that, not to harp on the initiatory, but it really is the aspiration. Like, Christ sees in us his heirs. And so to be a king and priest means we're going to destroy this caste system. We're going to destroy this way that naturally Babylon hierarchalizes us. But not yet. You're going to be this, right? I also want to, we have to keep this in mind because we're playing into this constantly. And a lot of times, we just had, you guys remember a few years ago when the bishop got in trouble, and was it like, was it in Lehigh? It was like a prostitution thing. Do you guys remember this?
Oh,
It was
I
awful.
I feel like I heard about several cases, but yeah.
Right. What results in someone thinking to call a man who at his core is a villain, like he's wrong? And it's probably because they had a sort of, this guy looks like a great businessman. He's successful in all these things. Well, maybe we need to put him here then too. And that's not what we see with figures like Moses or Enoch or Peter. That sort of evolutionary fitness isn't the way. I mean, it might be evolutionary fitness on some level we don't see, but God sees potential in us and wants to, the loss of power allows us to be elevated. And so it's a wild thing that these operate differently. And again, we need to see that just because we're Luke Skywalker on a weird little planet over here that has the Force and doesn't understand it yet, doesn't mean there's not Darth Vaders who are that are chosen because of power that you and I are up against.
Okay, I don't want to take this like on a weird tangent, but I was thinking, Chris, when you were talking about did any of you guys read Malcolm Gladwell ever? He has his book David and Goliath, and I was thinking too about what you're saying in the sense that a lot of times, what we perceive as strength isn't necessarily, or strength often arises from weakness or from right there, yay. Okay, love me some Malcolm Gladwell also. And so anyway, I don't know where that goes, except kind of again, like maybe we misperceive so often what actual strength and power is, or what that actually looks like, and and then make mistakes like making that guy the bishop.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. I feel like Christianity, it has a really nuanced view of hierarchy. Because on the one hand, like, at the top is God, right? And there's only him. But then, I think about the people of Israel who were enslaved and they're at the bottom of the hierarchy, and then they're free. And they're figuring out like how to be free. And then Moses says, he says Yahweh is going to covenant with you to be a priest and a priestess, and so that elevates you, and it also like makes it more egalitarian. Like, not only are we all elevated, but we're all on the same tier, and then we're not just all at the bottom, but we're all at the top, which is awesome. It's such a hopeful message, and that's it's really nuanced. And then I think about like Christ often says, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And then, in the book of Alma, with the Sons of Mosiah and their missionary work. They too are in a kind of hierarchy, but it's more communal, and they serve one another. And so um, I think it's tricky. And Jordan, in my opinion, as I read this chapter, it's not one of the criticisms that people give of Jordan Peterson. They say, well, his rules and his philosophy is kind of not very clear, and it's kind of contradictory. And I'm like, yeah, I actually agree with that critique, but I think at the same time he's wrestling with the ideas. It's like, we live in a hierarchy, but ideally it should be really equal. But if it's not going to be, then the least you can do is to take your place. And I think he makes a case here that the hierarchy isn't based on power, right? It's not based on pure tyrannical force. And he gives another example in the chapter about chimps who fight each other, and or the gorillas that fight each other, and the gorillas that actually are more pro-social tend to stay at the top of their primate hierarchy because chimps are willing to cooperate with them. So there's something about cooperation and competence that is really like is what causes like the most stable hierarchies rather than just brute force. And that is also a helpful message. But I think I can already hear kind of like the people who don't like Jordan saying, "Oh, this whole idea is really problematic because people start to insert all sorts of social hierarchies, like racial hierarchies or class-based hierarchies or economic-based hierarchies, and that's not good." But Peterson is insistent. He's like, not only is this hierarchy a thing, it's real, and it's real in a lot of different ways. He says it's real because it's socially constructed, but it's not merely socially constructed. It's also like evolutionary, and also there's a sort of like a religious aspect to it too that's like abstract. So he's getting into all that in this chapter, and he does it, I think, in a very accessible way, which is cool. But yeah, the tension between Peterson's idea of hierarchy and like a Christian notion of hierarchy, I think those are in tension throughout the book. And I think everyone's correct to wrestle with that because I think of Christianity as something that's being radically egalitarian, especially in the context of like Roman power. It's like totally radical. But Jordan Peterson, who is very influenced by people like Nietzsche, he's like, no, there's something about this hierarchy that he's gonna put a stake in the ground here, and so that's tricky, But I think that's what makes for a good system of thought, is that you're willing to wrestle with those ideas.
Alejandro, I have a criticism about Jordan.
Sure.
Here, and I'd love to hear what people think of it. I'm really against performative manliness. Like, there's just something that grates at me.
So
I don't mind
those guys with the green matchas and the tote bags. You're not into that?
That's right. I don't like, I'm looking at all these beards here. I'm getting triggered. But but no, I like the idea of dangerous. I There's one line in this. He's just hinting at something that he's talked about a lot more. Maybe we'll see in another rule, which is if you learn to be a top lobster, you're going to be able to keep it together, and that's important. Keeping together is important, and it includes like when someone destroys your life, when your dad dies, when his big thing later on is like, don't cry at your dad's funeral. I think I'm not sure that is the strength I want, right? Like, I want a sort of an emotional control that allows me to use emotions when I need to use them, right? That they serve different purposes. And specifically, I want to throw in that our man here is writing this book and what's going on in his personal life.
Oh, I mean, his wife has pancreatic cancer. He's wrestling with both success and tons of criticism, and he's having autoimmune issues as well. So
how's he coping?
Oh, I would say,
he's not drinking.
I think at this point, I mean, well enough to write a book, but also like he's sinking deeper and deeper into like the what are they called, the the antidepressant, yeah,
Benzodiazepine.
benzodiazepine
Yeah.
addiction, yeah, which is tough. I mean, I've had family members who've
4
taken that.
Xanax a day? That's insane.
Yeah,
That's like real levels. Javier's like, I can do that in a weekend. But no, this is that sort of numbing effect. So here we have a guy talking really, really tough while
hmm,
also medicating himself in a way that's really extreme.
yeah.
Um, I'd love to hear what you guys think about
Doesn't he cry in like every interview?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. Like, he does cry in
That's
almost
just what I'm
every
saying.
interview. Not everyone, but he cries often
Not
on
everyone.
camera.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anytime he talks about his family or his wife, especially, he cries.
He does cry often. Um.
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
well, okay. All I was going to say is I think that's a really interesting point, Chris, and I hadn't really thought about that. And I think it is a thing I wrestle with. My husband and I have discussed it a lot because I think we have 4 boys, and all of them have different. We have one that is bisexual and a little gender fluid, and trying to figure out what does it look like what does it look like to teach my sons to be men in the world that we live in today, and without having like stereotypes, but also what does that actually look like? Anyway, I think it's an interesting. I do think he kind of gets that wrong because I don't think it is what we kind of think of as the traditional, strength. It's something different.
And if I may interject, not to draw any comparisons, because I would venture to say this is not what Jordan Peterson has in mind, but I think his point lines up pretty consistently with Doctrine and Covenants 19, where Jesus Christ says, right, which suffering caused myself, even God, the greatest of all, to tremble because of pain and to bleed at every pore, and to suffer both body and spirit, and would that I might not drink the bitter cup and shrink. Nevertheless, glory be to the Father, and I partook and finished my preparations. So, this idea of not shrinking, I think that's. Oh, sorry. I think that's ideally what we're after, right? Not a display of masculinity, not a display of strength, because here the Lord isn't doing any particular display, right? He's not saying, I went ahead and did some action or I did some display. He just says, I would rather shrink, but I didn't. Glory be to the Father. I went through. So I think that's, if not the answer, at least a good starting point. Not shrinking in the face of being. Now,
that.
how
I
we
love
go,
that, dude.
it's different, right?
Yeah,
But yeah.
great line right there. That's going on the shorts, man.
To follow that up, recently on Ward Radio, they talked about there was a conversation they probably recorded it months ago, but it was a conversation with Shad Brooks, and they were talking about what is truth. He had a really interesting perspective that actually, for me, called back to an interview that Jordan Peterson had on the Joe Rogan Experience with Brett Weinstein, and what they were talking about was that truth is and this is really defined it well for me. Is truth is like more accurately described when we're talking about archery, when we aim at a target and we let loose and it flies true to the target. That's what truth is. It takes you there. And what Shad was saying on Ward Radio was that truth is what gets us closer to the divine, closer to God. And I think part of that aspect, as Javier was talking about, like not shrinking. I had in 2019, my brother passed away, and I'm not super awesome. Like I used to not really like funerals, and when we were having the viewing and everything, one of the things that I made myself do is I'm going to stand at the foot of his casket and soak it in, look at the honesty of the situation. And I feel like that actually opened myself up to receiving other inspiration that I needed to be able to move forward with his passing. And I think that's a big part of it, is honestly looking at life and how it actually presents itself, and allowing, Chris, you talked about emotions, like allowing the emotions to be. I say this all the time to various people, that emotions aren't really, they're not the thing, they're the indicator of the thing. And that if you can pay attention to those emotions, then you can have a little bit better direction of how to direct after that.
Love it. I think there is, I think there is a problem, especially today, and this has increased, I think, in the past 10 years, of this performative male thing. I think about like the Andrew Tate D bags out there, and even in LDS circles, some LDS people are deep in like the red pill sort of thing, and it quickly turns into like misogyny real fast, and there's this idea of, here, I think this is really relevant. I hate this phrase when people they say like, oh well, my wife needs to submit to me, which sounds so terrible. um
Well, to
but
say it in public.
yeah, they'll say it in public. Yeah, which
I'm
is
just
terrible.
messing with you.
But I think about this. So I read over the summer. I read a book called A Unified Theory of Psychology, by a guy named Greg Enriquez, and it was great, a great book. But one of the things he says is he says, he's trying to reconcile all these different psychological theories, and he says, yeah, there's something about human beings where we have a degree of social influence, and he says, people who have a lot of social influence, they have people who are lined up ready to work with them. They want to cooperate with them. Like if President Oaks called you and said, hey, I need you to do this thing for me, you're saying, yes, when do you want it done? And then if, on the other hand, people with very low social influence, like they have nothing but enemies, and you're not willing to cooperate with them, and it costs them a lot more effort to get people to cooperate with them. And I think about this top lobster idea where, there is this faux masculinity where people, they sort of recognize that like people who are amazing, like, yeah, their partners cooperate with them. That's ideal for your partner to cooperate with you. But if you have to tell them to submit to you, then really you're indicating that you are a person of low social influence, because you have to beg for the submission, which is, again, you're a loser if you have to like nag and beg people for cooperation. So I hear these like red pill dudes talking about their wives submitting to them. I'm like, you guys are losers and you don't even know it. It's the worst thing. But I think in this chapter, and I think that's controversial, right? Because he says, if you're a top lobster, you get all the mates, and I think there's a romantic image of like, yeah, like, if I'm the top dog, like women are gonna love me, and it's like the true top dogs, who not are they top dogs because they're good at what they do, but they're top dogs because everyone wants to cooperate with them, and that's really where the money is. It's like, it's the cooperation. People want to work with you not because they're submitting to you, but it's like people are inspired to work with you. And there's something about leadership. I think this is also a huge problem, is like the lack of leadership in the workplace. There are bad managers everywhere, and there are bad bosses everywhere, and bad administrators, and people want to work with people that inspire them. And I think that is there's something about voluntary cooperation that is inspiring to others. And really, like, even in radical communitarian visions of society, they're not chaos because they're all, sometimes it can fall into chaos if people fall into some sort of cult of personality, but those groups function because their leaders inspire them to work together. And I think that's admirable. I think that's great. And I think that an authentic competence and cooperation in leadership, that's like that is the opposite of like this faux performative masculinity where you think people are going to respect you because you have big muscles, or because are you've misplaced your assertiveness and now you're really truly just a misogynist. And I think Peterson, yeah, he has his issues, which he's been transparent about, But I think people like Peterson because they like his ideas, not really because he is like the tough guy. I mean, the dude's like a skinny nerd. Like he's not an Andrew Tate guy.
No, he has a dangerousness about him that's like unrivaled. So yeah, I immediately thought Andrew Tate too. I thought even the line dangerous, right? I've heard
Hmm.
morons use it, right? Um, but the idea of not, I mean, we all know the Australian interview with Jordan Peterson, right?
Right.
Where he says, well, he turns it around and says, "You've been willing to make this uncomfortable for me. Why am I not allowed to make it uncomfortable for other people?" And so he uses logic. It's one move, and it is this incredible awakening moment for this reporter. And it's definitely, I mean, he gives us the four stages of a lobster fight in this chapter, which is so fun,
Yeah, that's
right?
kind of true.
And
Yeah.
and the goal is just to be able to do fight one, right? You just show the claws and then you get back to work. Because you're not trying to oppress people. You're not trying to rip their arms off. You're not trying to do those things. But the ability, the realization that the other person understands that you're not just going to allow them to do harm to you for their own aggrandizement is actually really important in the world, um, for all sorts of reasons, right?
So I was thinking, I think this looks different for women in a lot of ways, as far as like what top looks like or what. And I had a realization a few years ago. So my sister and I both are both very like self-deprecating in our humor, and kind of like the way we present ourselves is kind of like, no, like oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this, like whatever. It's kind of a way I make friends, and it's like whatever. But I realized that there were people who were taking advantage of that, or like assumed that I was incompetent because I'm making jokes about how I forgot to get gas in the car, how my house is messy or whatever, right? And anyway, I just remember kind of having this conversation with this friend and realizing like it's serving me in some ways, because women do kind of feel threatened when somebody's like too put together or too whatever. But then it was not serving me in other ways, right? Because there are women who are like very, very hierarchical in the way they think. And they're like, oh, this woman is a weakling. And I did have to kind of present a different thing to them than I would maybe be inclined to. Kind of my natural way of engaging with people is, like I said, a little bit more self-deprecating, a little bit jokey, a little bit anyway. So, but I'm thinking through as you're talking about the way, show your claws a little bit. Sometimes you have to kind of go, no, hold on. Like, and that is what that looked like in a woman from a woman's perspective, which anyway, I'm a big advocate of like women and men are equal, but there are very different ways that we socialize, I think, for sure.
One of my favorite scriptures of all time is DNC 121. It's the famous line from verse 41 to 43, right? No power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood, only by persuasion, by long suffering, by gentleness, meekness, and love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul without hypocrisy and without guile, reproving betimes with sharpness when moved upon by the Holy Ghost, and then showing forth afterwards an increase of love towards him whom thou hast reproved, lest he esteem thee to be his enemy. To me, that scripture has always stuck with me as like really the model of proper leadership, where and there's so many bad examples of poor leadership that fail to do this, but it's true. Like I've been in situations where I do feel like the pressure, like the eyes are on me, and like are people gonna think that I'm put together enough, or am I going to measure up and stuff? And it's tough, but I think the best leaders really are like the mentors who if you do fall short, they say, hey, like we love you, but you got to do better, and you can do it, but today wasn't your day, tomorrow will be your day. And I think when it comes to navigating teams with different personalities and different backgrounds, like being able to pull people together, I think the way it's laid out in DNC 121 is like the way to do it. And I think that's becoming more and more rare today, unfortunately. All right. Well, we're about an hour. We're not quite there yet, but um, I wanted to, before we move on, I had some other thoughts. But anything else that the chapter that stood out to you about the chapter?
LDS setting, page 23 has this awesome thing about bullying, right? And the first paragraph of the chapter says sometimes people are bullied because they can't fight back. And then in the next paragraph begins with the phrase, but just as often people are bullied because they won't fight back. Latter-day Saints are bullied in 2025, 2026. We are a bullied people. Is it because we can't fight back, or is it because we won't fight back?
I don't know. I saw a meme about the people. It was a Lehi's vision, right? And the Great Institution building had all the bullies, and they were sending their bullying messages, and then along the banks of the river, people shouting back, and then all the people go into the tree, and it said, they heeded them not. I think there's people that are definitely going to be open to hearing, to be ready to accept that, hey, maybe we've got things differently, and actually have good conversations about it. But there's people who they're not willing to say, maybe I can look at this differently, and so they're not going to find any value in hashing that out with us, and we're not going to be able to convert them if we're throwing these seeds of truth on stony ground. So I think there's truth to that. Like, the bullying's not going to stop, but I also don't think that addressing them is really going to do anything. They're going to scream louder and tell us, we believe in a different Jesus and all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, if we know where we've placed our trust and faith and what we have our mind and heart set upon.
Sorry. I have tended in the past to agree with that perspective. Pretty much 100%. I think, like, I, subscribe to a peace model for sure. But I'm like devil's advocate here with what Chris is saying, kind of that idea of like, we teach people how to treat us. Is there a way that we could, I don't know what that would look like. Is there a way that we could, as a faith community, kind of say, no, this is unacceptable? Like, we, in a way that isn't us, kind of catering to those kind of lowest, loudest voices. I don't know. But when we're looking at the rules in that first chapter and hierarchy, like, maybe there is a place for us to say, this isn't acceptable to treat us in a way that no other faith community, like, people couldn't get away with that in any other, right? Like it is very clear, if people were saying the same things about Jews or Muslims or any of those, it would be loudly discouraged by so many people. But I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I am wondering if there is a way we could do it in the right way, I guess.
I think if there were a right way, it actually goes into the other thought from the chapter that I had. The idea of killing them with kindness. I was telling Alejandro a month or two ago, I don't remember exactly when, but I was talking about how one of the things that completely takes the wind out of the sails of anybody who is in conflict is saying, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to go do this service project, because it's really hard to, like, hate somebody that is clearly right next to you doing something good. And I feel like that's like the top lobster move. We're going to organize this thing, and if you don't show up, that's fine. We're still going to go do this good thing.
which is in Jordan Peterson's universe aggression, right? That is killing with kindness or fighting with kindness is aggression. It is demonstrating, no, I can't be bullied, right? Just because you have a smile on your face and a hand on their shoulder doesn't mean you're not creating that boundary. I like that, Devin.
And then there's also the I don't know where it is. Just this idea that I've heard is that when we talk about the Latter-day Zion, the New Jerusalem, no one wants to go up to the New Jerusalem, and I can't help but think it's not because they're terrifying, but I can't help that it's because they're like these terrible, like these are competent, like you can't argue with them, they're gonna love you, and you're gonna not know what to do. It's gonna disarm you basically because you're not able to handle it. I think that makes more sense, and I don't know how that comes about yet, but I think that's a big element, is that we take care of one another that way, and that's what makes us so terrifying. Is no one is everyone is there to fight the cause of Zion.
Dude,
We're
that's an
formidable.
awesome comparison. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is such an awesome comparison to this idea of being dangerous so you don't actually have to be dangerous, right? And so your image, this is the Zion's camp thing, but it's pulled from the Old Testament, of the day is going to come where our banners are terrible, right? They're going to say of the armies of Zion. Um, gosh, that's beautiful comparison, Devin. Very cool.
Um, Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I was just going to say it reminds me of a
go
phrase
ahead,
that I
Lara.
love from Brene. Just a phrase I love from Brene Brown. She says, "Stand your holy ground," and that's what that reminds me of. Stand your holy ground, right? If you know that, like, where I am is based in truth, then yeah.
I was just gonna say one of the quotes that I remember from this chapter was, and I might slaughter it, was, "If you can bite, you generally don't have to." So I think, if as long as, like, again, we're formidable, just showing people that we're formidable. My experience with the military, um, I've actually been fairly lucky. I don't think I've ever really been. I've maybe had like one or two times where I've been like really bullied by people because of my religion. But almost like 9 times out of 10, it's some just goofy jokes that are maybe come off as bullying, but it's also just because they're genuinely interested in understanding more. And that's when you kind of have to discern, like, hey, man, like, do you really want to know more? Are you genuinely interested? And like sometimes there are like those jokes, but you do have to, I've found, at least with the military, you do have to stand your ground a bit. And maybe it is because it is more of like the machismo environment, because it's the military and it's generally, that's all the types of dudes that join that. And so at least you just have to be, you can't just be like a pushover and just be like, oh yeah, man, like just pick on me, whatever, kind of thing. Cause then they're just like, they'll just keep going at it. So I don't know.
Yeah, so I think about, in trying to answer your question, Chris, I think about like flops that have happened in the past. So like, back in 2016 on Twitter in particular, Latter-day Saints were trying to create a community that would sort of like stand up to criticism. And it was run by some pretty terrible people. And they, in the aftermath, like a bunch of people got like lost their jobs because they were caught like saying anti-Semitic, racist, misogynistic things. The Attorney General in
Well, that's not
Alaska.
good.
Yeah, exactly. And like one of their motivations was like, I'm tired of getting dogpiled on Twitter all the time. I want to, like, we need to show some more teeth. But it kind of became that faux masculinity thing that is actually toxic. And I would even not say toxic. I think it's immoral, really. Like, being racist is immoral. It's not masculine at all. And so that sucks. But then I think also too, like, the people in Michigan who were shot in that chapel. And that, again, it's like, I don't know how we could have prevented that. And of course, the guy who did it was like, he was mentally ill. And that guy needed resources probably, but of course, those Latter Day Saints too needed protection. And how do we do that? And some people have suggested like open carry in chapels, and for political reasons, I don't see that flying. We would probably not be welcomed in other countries if that was our church-wide policy. But there is something to be said about standing up to evil. And if you do occupy a top lobster position, and if your goal is to cooperate, then that also suggests that you have a responsibility to protect others and to fight for marginalized communities, people who have less. Not to sound super lefty, but there is truth in that. Like, we're supposed to be generous with our resources, and the Latter Day Saint, the church does so much in charity and humanitarian aid, that I think really it's a long term thing. Eventually, every day we are winning more and more respect from the community, and despite like the bullying that we have experienced through Hulu reality TV shows and things like that, like we are having record baptisms, and there was an article in the New York Times that said, there are so many women that are Mormon on national TV, and it's like, we've been there the whole time, and you're just finally noticing. And I think, um, maybe see one of the tangents that Peterson takes, in the chapter. He talks about Taoism. He talks about what's real and what's not real, and order and chaos. And he says, that which is real is that which remains stable across longer and longer periods of time. And the church is going to outlive all of us, and the Mormon reputation in society is going to outlive all of us, and that's that, according to the chapter, that's what's most real. And so I think in the end, the Christian perspective is, yeah, the battle's already won and time is catching up to us. And I think that's really the perspective that I take is, yeah, like, instances of bullying will happen, and I think they'll happen less and less. The height of it all was, the Missouri Order in the 1800s. There's been less and less violence towards us since, but it still happens. But into the future, I think it's going to happen less and less, which is great. And so I think it's already up. The trajectory is already upward, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
I would like to predict that it does not become less and less.
Really? All right.
Yeah, I'll second Chris's prediction. Well, I'll get on that train with him.
Awesome. Go ahead.
I'm not sure where I fall on the whether it's going to be less and less. Or I could see it going either way, honestly, and I definitely can see an uptick in some negative press for sure, based on the way things are trending. But I was thinking too, again, that maybe we can apply some other Jordan Peterson thoughts here with the whole, like, clean your own room first. Like, I think that when you're kind of whole, you're not so worried about who cares what the haters are saying. And so, and then to apply another, I think it's, dang it, what's his name? Wilcox, not Brad, the other one, Michael, talks about how, you have your foot on your compass, right? Your math compass, and how if it's planted, then you can have a wide reach, and you can, and he's kind of applying that sort of to like our engagement with other religions. But I think it applies here when we're kind of grounded in the principles that we really believe in, then maybe we don't need to worry so much about engage, who cares? It's like flies. I don't know. I say that, and of course now we've had this shooting in recent days, right? So it doesn't not matter at all. I'm just not sure how we fight that directly.
Yeah, I mean, I think so Jordan is sort of like steeped in this Jungian worldview kind of thing, and that's really popular among us and lobsters. And I think about like integrating your shadow. And I remember I read this book. I can't remember what book it was, but it had a line that was clever that I liked. And it said something like, you want to look like a guy who just got out of prison, but no one's gonna mess with you, But you're cool, like if you were gonna go to prison, like, well, would people be messing with you, or would people be scared that you're gonna be messing with them, right? And it's like I think strength is a virtue. You got to be able to. I think the ideal here is like, yeah, you should be able to show some teeth, but be what's the term? It's like, be as wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. And I think, yeah, like that imagery is perfect because you have to be on your game and you have to protect your family and be like, hey, look, don't mess with me or my kids, but I'm gonna treat you right if you are cool. And so I think that's important and it's practical. But there's again, these ideas are in tension with one another, which I think makes for great reading. So all right, guys, thank you. Wonderful discussion. I love it. So many insightful comments today. Um, we're going to continue. I think we'll meet up in about 2 weeks. If you want to join the discussion, join Latter-day Lobsters. You can, of course, like and subscribe to the channel. We'll keep our roughly speaking series going. And feel free to reach out. And thank you, everyone, for being a part of it today.